Hello, and welcome to today's event. My name is Brian Strait, and I'm editor-in-chief of Supply Chain Management Review, which is part of Peerless Media's supply chain group. And I'll be your host for today's session entitled Process Automation Trends in SAP Supply Chain, that is being brought to you by Precisely. I was recently at the ProMat conference in Chicago, and I don't know how many of you were there as well, but if you were, you couldn't help but notice all the automation technology. It was literally everywhere. And while talk of supply chain automation most often revolves around the robots, there are many other types of automation that can provide significant value to your organization. Automation is now the key to building a robust supply chain, whether you use it for onboarding new employees, producing your products, packing items for shipping, or one of the many other opportunities that exist. The options today are endless. Joining us today for today's discussion is Andrew Hayden, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Precisely. Precisely is a global leader in data integrity, and Andrew is going to walk us through the latest research in process automation, what the priorities for automation are, the challenges they present, and how Precisely Automate drives automation success in SAP supply chain processes. At the conclusion of today's discussion, we should have time for a short Q&A session, so please submit your questions and comments at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many of those as time allows, but if we don't get to your question today, they'll be forwarded to Andrew for follow-up. If you're interested in a PDF of the slide presentation, that will be available on demand following today's event. Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Brian. It is great to be here, and I very much appreciate it. As Brian said, I'm Andrew Hayden. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for the Automate products here at Precisely. Been with the company about 5 years. I've been in the technology space probably for going on about 25. So been around this area for a long time, and really, hopefully today you will get a better sense for how software automation and process automation can help you really achieve some of those objectives that you want to in terms of efficiency and agility within your supply chain processes. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. And as Brian said, I'm going to talk to you about process automation trends for SAP supply chain. So let's get started. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to start off by talking a little bit about what's happening in the marketplace from a macro scale, what we're seeing overall with business. And then more on a detailed scale, there was a recent study that we sponsored from SAP Insider, specifically about some of the concerns that supply chain has and how they feel, or how supply chain leaders feel automation can help provide benefits to them. We're going to talk about what makes some of these SAP processes so challenging for us in not only supply chain, but just in business in general. But specifically, we're going to look at the impacts that those processes and the data within SAP have on supply chain and have on your overall business success. I'm going to walk you through the Precisely Automate portfolio, and I'm going to focus on our Evolve platform. We feel that is probably the area based on the research that you can get the greatest benefits from Precisely for solving a lot of those supply chain automation needs that you have. I'm going to walk you through a little case study for one of our customers who had a really, really interesting supply chain challenge and how they solved it using our Evolve platform and process automation to really drive benefits that we'll talk to at the end. And then I'll do a little bit of a wrap up. So let's talk about what's happening in the marketplace. There's a lot of dynamics that have happened recently. And one of the things that's been a big focus for businesses and enterprises really for the last couple of decades, but it's become more relevant recently, is agility. And in 2019, KPMG, when they did their global CEO outlook, found that about 2/3 of CEOs agreed with the statement that acting with agility is the new currency of business. If we are too slow, we will be bankrupt. And if you've heard me talk about this before, you've probably heard me say this before, but I find it ironic that they did this in 2019. Because if we think about what happened in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and suddenly we were confronted with challenges to our business and challenge to our business model that we'd never had before, we suddenly had to find out how fast can we pivot? How quickly can we move? How agile are our businesses? So this understanding that 2/3 of CEOs in 2019 thought that agility was important, now I'm sure that number is significantly higher. And some of the data that we're about to talk about kind of bears this out. In order to get this agility into our business, probably the core area we're seeing the emphasis be placed is around digital transformation. And we've been doing digital transformation for decades. But I think there's this recognition that data is that core and that fuel for decision making today. And it's going to be more important as we go forward in the future. And we're
investing a massive amount of money into digital transformation. Now, Gartner estimates that in the past year, we've spent $1.3 trillion on digital transformation worldwide. So this is software, services, hardware, all the things associated with it. So our investments are massive. But if you think about it, we've been doing that for a long time. And then the pandemic hit. And since the pandemic, when KPMG went back and talked to CEOs, they found that 80% of CEOs now will find themselves accelerating their digital transformation efforts. There was this recognition in 2020 that what we've done so far over the past couple of decades simply hasn't been enough. And we have to go faster because we don't know what's around the corner, when there's going to be the next shock to the economy or the next pandemic that's going to hit. And we need that agility in our businesses. Digital transformation is one of the core areas that we see this happening. And within digital transformation, we firmly believe that automation is probably the greatest way to drive value into your enterprise, just by automating those various processes you have, and specifically in your SAP processes. Now, also in 2020, when KPMG went back and did their survey, they found that about two-thirds of CEOs see themselves investing more in technology than they're going to invest in people. This does not mean that they are looking to replace people with technology. We've done that. We have spent the past 20 years right-sizing our organizations and downsizing our organizations and optimizing our organizations to be just that perfect size for our business. Unfortunately, our businesses continue to grow dynamically and organically in all those ways that we see. So what CEOs are looking for now is they're looking for technologies that can augment the staffs that they have, that can make their current people more efficient and more effective. And automation is a fundamental way to do this. And as we walk through this presentation, I think you'll see some examples of how we can help make that happen precisely. And when we look at supply chain specifically, McKinsey recently did a study, and for all the work we've done in technology over the years, 85% of supply chain leaders are struggling with inefficient or insufficient technology. So within the supply chain world, there is a lot we can still do. Again, I'm going to go back to, because we're talking about automation today, the importance that automation plays in the role that it plays in improving your business and really helping drive a lot of those things, a lot of that improvement in your supply chain processes. So let's talk a little bit about what SAP Insider found. As I mentioned, we sponsored this report. I'm just going to touch on a few things, but Kumar Singh, who wrote it, has done an amazing job of really capturing a tremendous amount of information about how process automation can drive benefits through supply chain. What are some of the concerns and what it can do for you? It's 30 pages of really good information. So I highly recommend downloading it. We are going to send you a link to it for those of you who've registered or are attending this webinar. So definitely go. If you are watching this webinar later, we will make sure that you get a copy of it if you don't contact us, or we can look it up on the SAP Insider site, I'm sure, but we would be more than happy to supply it to you, because I do believe that the information in it is extremely valuable. So what did we find? Where are the areas that we see it is most relevant and important for us to understand in this short period of time we have today? Well, obviously, we're talking about process automation, and in this report, almost 90%, so 89% of supply chain leaders that were surveyed found that process automation is either important or very important to their success in supply chain. Now, think about what that means. Obviously, it's one of those areas that, as we saw, 85% have insufficient technologies. So, process automation is one of those technologies that can drive a lot of benefits through it. So these numbers actually add up pretty well. Now, when you dive in a little bit further and go, what is driving the need for process automation? What are those top business drivers? One is the need for supply chain resiliency. I mean, given all the disruptions that have happened in supply chains over the last 2.5 years, there was a lag at the beginning of the pandemic, but now it's caught up to us, and we're seeing these constant interruptions in our supply chain. So the resilience of our supply chain and how automation can play a role in making your supply chains more resilient, absolutely important. And then the other one, again, goes back to agility. Because in order for a supply chain to be resilient, it has to be agile. And visibility comes along with both of those. So these top three things, I mean, obviously, visibility is a distant third from what those drivers are. automation can have a significant effect in all of these. We can help you be more agile. We can help you be more resilient because you can change and pivot quickly and maintain the structures and the suppliers you need, and get visibility throughout that process. Automation can help you do that. And when we dive in a little bit further and go, what are the benefits or the strategies for automation? One is just process standardization. Right now, we know that a significant percentage of supply chain processes, especially SAP supply chain processes, are manually done, which means that they're not governed or they're variable in so many different ways. So automation can help you standardize these processes. The case study I'm going to walk you through is a great example of somebody being able to standardize their processes. Process visibility comes back as well, knowing what's happening throughout that process. Where are things? What is the status of them? What's changed? What hasn't changed? What do we need to adapt to? Is there a shipment changes? Are we expecting something to be early or late? Again, with all these disruptions we've seen in supply chain, having visibility throughout is incredibly important. And then the other one is this combination of collaboration and visibility. So having different groups across our organizations be able to participate in that supply chain process that we have and do it in an efficient manner. And we know what's happening throughout. Where we see it most in SAP is in areas like vendor create. So when you're creating a new vendor or supplier and you need people throughout your organization to participate in that, that combination of collaboration and visibility is very important. And then finally, from this report, when we looked at it, we found that the requirements that enterprises have for process automation to help them execute those strategies are also very important. So it's end-to-end process visibility, knowing what's happening throughout that process, increased process efficiency. Obviously, you want it to be able to go, smoothly, no matter what, no matter if there are changes. If you do have to be agile and pivot, it still needs to be efficient. Documentation and standardization. It just comes down to governance. How are we going to govern this process, and how do we make sure the process is followed every time? And then end-to-end supply chain. We know that end-to-end process automation is always important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where those interdependencies are, not only throughout processes, but the data that you're moving throughout those processes. And then the other one that came out of this report was the challenge or the need to build internal skill sets. And in this case, where that comes down to really what we feel is being able to deliver a no-code, low-code solution so that people who are close to the process can either directly develop the automations, or they can at least modify them and change them when they need to, when there is a change. We don't believe you necessarily have to have a significant IT intervention every time you need a change or send it out to a systems integrator. You should be able to do it within the teams that own those processes. So that really covers what we've seen in the marketplace and then what specifically came out of this recent study from SAP Insider. So that should give you a framing for what we're going to talk about now. But really what I'm going to touch on next is let's look at the processes themselves. These are all the imperatives that people see and the strategies they see for automation. But what is it that makes these supply chain processes within SAP so challenging? And what have we seen over the years as previously Wind Shuttle and now as Precisely? One of the big things we've learned over the years is that you can't tackle processes and data separately. You have to tackle them together. These two things are interdependent. You can't do a process improvement initiative without looking at the data that process is creating and managing. Because let's be honest, if that process is creating bad data, all you're going to do by driving efficiency into that process is create more bad data faster. And that doesn't help you at all. So you need to look at the data within that process and how does that process create it and manage it, and what is the quality of that data. And the same basically is in reverse. If you just do a data quality initiative on the back end, if you haven't fixed the processes on the front end, all you're going to do is continue to fix data that has been created badly. And this applies across your business, and especially throughout your supply chain processes. So all of your product data that you're looking at, and then within supply chain, it's materials, customer, vendor, onboarding, the management, all of that stuff that really relies very, very deeply on SAP master data. And so for us, when we're looking at SAP master data, what we're looking at obviously are the big four. So material, vendor, customer, and then your financial master data that underpins it all. But it's not just those four categories. You have to look at all of the reference and conditional data that you're also using to run your actual business that happen within these other sub processes, bills of materials, routings, um, everything else that are the things you actually do to get a product out the door. That's where the complexity of master data becomes not only the four big ones, but everything down below it. And we're going to talk about how you can use automation to manage that complexity. And having done this for nearly 20 years as Wind Shuttle and now as Precisely, we've really come to understand that you can break down processes onto two axes, basically. One is the volume of data that you're going to run through that process, and the other one is the complexity of that process. Now, low volume, low complexity processes, you're probably never going to automate. It doesn't make sense. There's no financial return on it. It doesn't financially, it just doesn't make sense at all. High volume, high complexity processes tend to be unique to an organization. And those are the kind of things where we often see somebody going out and your IT department is going to go look for a systems integrator, and they're going to do a lot of work around that because it's a big project. Everything in between that, however, is where our Automate platform plays. This is where Evolve can help you drive automation success across those processes, from medium data volumes and low complexity all the way through very complex processes that aren't those extremely complex, unique problems to your organization. So if you think about it on these two axes, what we're going to talk about today when I talk about Evolve and about our platform is being able to fill that gap between the ones you're never going to automate and the ones you're going to go out and hire somebody for. And as I mentioned, within SAP and within our businesses, there are these complex data intensive processes which have traditionally been extremely difficult to automate. And when I talk about these, I often like to start in the middle, because most of us are companies that make a product. And whether it's a soft drink, as is in the slide here, or whether it's an automobile, we have an upstream and we have a downstream. And in the middle is that product we produce. And we're going to focus mostly on the upstream because the commonalities up there are the same no matter what you're making, versus downstream, where they tend to be a little more different depending on what channels you go through, what markets you're in, specifically what you produce, the complexity of your process or your product, all kinds of different stuff like that. So we're not going to even touch on that today. But let's look at some of these upstream processes and what makes them the common challenges we have across them. Fairly simple. When we're dealing with materials, we often have raw materials and semi-finished materials. They're coming from multiple suppliers. Often you're having multiple materials coming from one supplier or multiple suppliers supplying the same material. There's complexity there just by itself. Data objects in SAP can be ridiculously complicated. We know we've got customers who've got hundreds of fields associated with a single material, and then all the complexities that go with that. I'm going to digress in just a moment and talk about manual data entry and manual data management with spreadsheets. Just know, if you do that, you are not alone. Touch on that in just a second. You've got multiple plants. You often have frequent changes. You've got seasonal and promotional items. I'm not going to go through all these, but you get the point. There's a lot of commonalities no matter what you make on the upstream side. And most of these are supply chain related challenges. Now, I mentioned spreadsheets. 451 Research recently did a study, and they found that well over 60% of companies do a significant portion of their data management in Excel. So they're managing their data. They're creating data. They're cataloging it. They're often running it through a review and approval process. All of this is happening in Excel. Now, one of the biggest problems with Excel is these processes tend to be either poorly governed, if they're governed at all, and you have data quality issues at the end, because it may go through and get fully approved. And then you turn it over to somebody and they're going to manually enter it into either the SAP GUI if you're in ECC, or you're going to manually enter it into a Fiori app. So what you've done is you've introduced error at the end. So you've got a data quality problem as well as a governance problem. These are some of the challenges that happen with spreadsheet-driven processes. Again, the example I'm going to walk you through, the customer case study, is the perfect example of spreadsheets working and then becoming a fundamental problem. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But just know, if you are currently doing a lot of your SAP data management outside of SAP in Excel, you are not alone. There are lots of people doing that. And what makes this whole process so complex? Now, this is massively simplified, but if you think about how you get a product to market, it usually starts with your product development group, and they identify what are the materials and what are the processes, and then they're going to turn it over to procurement, and procurement is going to go out and they're going to look for vendors that you may already have. So they're going to look through a source list that is existing, or they're going to find new vendors. So you have to go through vendor creation and all of the materials that are associated or needed for that new product. So vendor and material tend to be intimately linked throughout that process. What are the things that you're going to need to do to keep that make that happen? And just understand there's double complexity there. If you're having to create new vendors, you've added even more complexity to it. Manufacturing operations is actually going to figure out, okay, what does it take to actually manufacture this product? We're going to engineer it. We're going to have to figure out, do we need new machines, all that kind of stuff. And again, what are the materials that are going to be used? How are the machines going to need to handle it? All that kind of stuff. Your warehouse, your logistics people are going to need to know, what are we receiving? When are we receiving it? Who are we receiving it from? Does it require special handling? How is it packaged? All kinds of information that's all part of that material master data and part of that vendor master. So again, this is all data that is intimately linked. So your data quality has to be absolutely perfect, or as close to perfect as you can make it, in order to maintain efficiency throughout this process. Visibility and governance throughout that supply chain process, absolutely critical, because production planning is going to be next in the line, and they want to know, when is everything going to be here? When are the products going to be here? When is the materials going to be here? When is all that new machinery going to be here? So we can put it in the schedule to actually manufacture it. Controlling needs to know what your costs are. How much is this going to cost us? We need to do margin analysis to understand, what is our expense going to be? Are we going to make any money off of this? Or how do we have to price it to make money? And finance sits in the middle of all this. And they're looking at, how much is it going to cost up front to buy the materials, to buy everything we need to manufacture this product? And then once it gets sold, how much money can we expect to come back in the door? So throughout this entire process, what you do in your supply chain is going to drive your success. An efficient, resilient supply chain that has agility to it is going to keep your costs down. So you're going to make more money on that product. You're going to have more, not just visibility, but predictability throughout it. It's going to help drive benefits across your entire business. And then when you look at the data itself, and you look at the complexity of the reference data and the conditional data that has to happen throughout it, and how it gets used for, again, I go back to bills of materials, recipes, routings, your pricing is going to be influenced by all this. So all of this thing, if you think about those processes, now you think about all those data objects and all the data stuff that you need. When you try and automate those, it often feels like you're trying to create one giant knot of what was described to me one time as data crap. And out the end of the door comes something. And it's one of those things that when you do it manually, it's highly complex, it's highly inefficient. It often has a lot of kind of individual people's knowledge that drives it. Automation can mitigate a significant amount of that business risk by being able to handle and control and manage that data and those processes as you go through them. So you can avoid this tangled knot of business interaction that you may be struggling with. So how does automation play into this? Now, how do we see automation at Precisely? Well, one of the things at Precisely, we look at automation really from a platform approach. And in our world, our automation platform has two basic components to it. One is data automation, which you'll often hear referred to as desktop automation. And this is, again, in our world, Excel to SAP. It's that exchange of data from SAP to Excel automatically. It's being able to use Excel as your front end to manage your SAP data seamlessly. You can extract the data out of SAP into an Excel sheet. You can do whatever kind of management you need to do to it, and then you can repost it to SAP directly from Excel. You can validate it against SAP before you actually post it, so you're ensuring that your data quality is correct. You can make all those changes without having the complexity and hassle of having to make changes within your SAP system and within your SAP GUI or within a Fiori app. So data automation is great for mass data processes, changes. We often see it for pricing is a big one. Um, Anytime you have materials changes, we've got a couple of really good case studies about that. So mass data changes, and that's with our studio product, which is sold both as part of the platform or independently. And then also within the platform comes process automation. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. And process automation falls into two flavors in our world. One is what we call Excel workflow. Now, Excel workflow can take those desktop automation or those data automation Excel files and manage them through a complex workflow process. One of the most common ones we see here is in finance for journal entries. So we often will see somebody having to manage, they're already doing stuff in Excel. So your accountants are working in Excel or working on invoices or whatever else is in that journal entry, and then managing that through a complex workflow that is governed and is completely visible, and you know what's happening. And at the end of it, when you automatically post that Excel file into SAP and the data from that Excel file, you can attach it directly to that SAP record. And it's always there. You know exactly what happened, and you've got a complete audit trail. Very important, very powerful tool for a lot of different things. Then there's form and workflow. Now, form and workflow in our world is often the sort of premier way of automating these complex data intensive processes like I talked about before, because what it enables you to do, is to manage these processes using business friendly and role based forms. So you will create forms that, say, for a customer or a vendor create, which we know has, often is touched by many people throughout your organization. Each one of those individuals in your organization or those groups within your organization only gets a form that either asks them for the information they need to give or provides them the information they need to see and review. And you may have multiple departments all seeing the same thing. At the end, it gets recompiled for a master data team or a procurement team or whoever is the final arbiter and approver. And once it's approved, it automatically posts to SAP. And you can do a lot of very conditional things with form and workflow. And I'll talk about that when I talk about, again, the case study, which is a great example of how form and workflow drives benefits. Now, when we talk about that platform at Precisely, we're talking about our Automate Evolve platform. And this gives you those enterprise-grade workflow and automation capabilities that you need to get a handle on these complex supply chain processes. You get that robust data stewardship. I'll talk about that in just a little bit in a minute. You get deep SAP integration, and you also get our knowledge. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for a very long time. We have patented SAP integration technology. We understand how SAP works and what many of those processes are and how to automate them most efficiently and most effectively. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a low-code, no-code environment that you're working in. So your business teams, the people closest to the process, are often able to create the automation, or else they're able to modify the automation and make changes very simply without having to go back to IT or without having to go to a systems integrator to do that work for you. Very important. We believe having those citizen developers in your organization who can work within Evolve and create the Evolve automation will drive even greater efficiencies for you. And as I mentioned, Evolve includes Studio. Studio is actually a core part of Evolve to help you develop that automation capability within it. So if you get Evolve, you also get that desktop automation capability. And we see a lot of people choosing, depending on the process that they need to automate. Is it going to be a form, or are we going to continue to work in Excel? So you have that flexibility and that ability to look at what makes the most sense for automating a particular process. Is it parallel? Is it sequential? Whatever it is that's going to work best for you and your organization, Evolve can help manage that effectively. So we're talking about being able to reduce cycle times and improve compliance, using that workflow and working through the way your organization needs it to. We're talking about improving data quality. As I mentioned, I talked a little bit about what you can do within an Excel file with the Studio add-in to Excel. And then with a form, you've got even more capabilities for driving higher data quality. And again, that initial data quality, when we're talking about the need for agility and efficiency, the higher the quality data you have up front, the faster your processes and organization can go with confidence. So you're reducing business risk by increasing that initial data quality. And then visibility. One of the things we saw is this need for governance, standardization, and visibility, agility, resilience, and visibility throughout. Having those dashboards and being able to check real time what is happening in a process, where is something, is there a bottleneck, when can we expect it to be through the process and approved, all that kind of stuff. You can have a dashboard that tells you all that information. So you know what's happening. It's no longer kind of this opaque quagmire of information you have to sort through and figure out what's happening, why is something not happening, and where is it. You know that up front. And even more so, one of the things we've heard over the years is being able to have other parties participate in the automation process. And this is where portals come in, because portals can give outside people, such as vendors or customers, access to their SAP data where they can make changes, they can make updates. And it's something you can develop easily internally. So you can create a customized web-based experience that is secure for those outside parties to access and make changes to their data. It's great for things like pricing changes, shipment updates, all that kind of stuff that can go through a portal. And the portal can be used either to directly post the data into SAP, or it can kick off a workflow so that internally somebody within your company can review it and make sure that what's been put in is correct and is going to be usable, or they can go back. But it eliminates that step of which often is very time consuming, of having a customer or a vendor submit something, which then can be on through an email or on a piece of paper, which we see frequently. It's kind of interesting. That then has to go through an internal process. Somebody has to process it internally, and then it starts the process. Now they're able to do that themselves. We deploy our portals through Azure, so they are secure and all the security is there. And then, as I mentioned, Evolve sits between that party and that portal and SAP. So it can either be a workflow process or it cannot. There's various different ways that it can be managed. Some of the examples of use cases we see: customer and vendor onboarding and information management, account management, any change requests that are coming through, profile management, cost and price updates, especially coming from suppliers when we've got highly dynamic supply chains and with commodity prices that can fluctuate literally by the hour, depending on what it is. Being able to have them change that almost in real time, again, can drive huge benefits through your entire value chain within your company. And then on the other end, when we're talking about distribution partners and ways that we can help them, same kind of benefits you're going to see. So being able to use portals and leverage portals to drive efficiencies into your supply chain processes, we believe is something that is going to be critical and extremely valuable going forward. Another thing we believe drives a lot of value within automation or to automating processes are APIs, or application programming interfaces. Now, an API is just a little piece of software that enables disparate systems to talk to each other. And we know from experience over the past couple of decades that talking to SAP is difficult, and integrating other systems with SAP can be extremely difficult. We allow you, because we have such intimate knowledge of how SAP works and these SAP processes, using our APIs can enable you to connect other systems to SAP that you previously were unable to. We have three different categories of them. One is the SAP data API. So if you've just got data that needs to go, essentially no enrichment, no changes to it, from a system of record into SAP, we can enable you to do that. We can enable you to do that through Evolve or through our Studio Manager product as well. The digital access API is if that data needs to be used in some form of an Evolve workflow. So it can either kick off the workflow, or it can participate in a workflow that's in process. So it's a really powerful tool for managing data and managing these processes that involve multiple systems of record. And finally, there's third-party API support. So this is API support for when you need to just connect different systems into usually an Evolve process. A good example of this would be something like address validation. We offer an API within Evolve to connect to our own Spectrum On Demand product, where you can validate addresses there, or other address validation systems that are available. And there's other systems that you may want to connect. And through that third-party API support, you're able to do it with those REST APIs. What these APIs also allow you to do is connect lots of different systems of record, where SAP is just one of the participants in a process. It works really well if you're doing a lot of master data governance. and master data management for multi-domain master data management. We have a multi-domain master data management hub in our Interworks product at Precisely, which is a great way to be able to manage that core data across multiple systems. So you're ending up with the highest quality data, and it's the same data no matter which system you're working in. So that's where APIs come in and can drive a lot of benefits. And what this ultimately gives you is greater resilience and agility for your supply chain processes. So using automation to connect those processes together, to manage that data through the system, to govern it and give you that auditability that you don't have otherwise, we believe is something that you can find a great deal of benefit for throughout that value chain and throughout your entire supply chain. And we would always recommend look for a complete set of capabilities. And these are just some of the ones we provide with Evolve. I mentioned you can either use Forms or Excel. There are a number of other capabilities. One of my favorites actually is dynamic process linking. So if you think of these processes that we've talked about, they're not really a process. They're a process which is often made up of sub-processes, and those sub-processes frequently have other sub-processes. Being able to dynamically link all of those processes together gives you a couple of things. One, it gives you the ability to see what's happening throughout multiple levels of process. So it gives you that visibility, again, throughout your value chain. But it also means that you can link sub-processes together. So when the final approval or whatever you need is achieved with a set of sub-processes, that can then automatically kick off the next level process. So very, very important to be able to do that, not only that visibility, but for the efficiency of the process to drive it through that. Flexible and extensible, we mentioned, the dashboarding I talked about, live SAP data validation, and then granular user and policy management. One of the things that we've always done is we adhere to your SAP user policies and protocols. So nobody who's using Evolve can do anything to SAP data that they don't have permissions to do by SAP. So again, you're ensuring that security and the governance that you need within your SAP environment, even when using Evolve and using Evolve Forms. And the other thing we look at is you want to be able to make sure you're making an impact at scale. You know, when I talked about that entire process for getting a product to market, it doesn't just sit in one department. It's not a procurement process. It's a procurement process and a materials process and a master data team process and logistics and finance and controlling. It happens across your entire SAP landscape. And being able to automate processes across your entire landscape drives greater efficiency and value to your organization. So we're very confident that automation and using our Evolve platform can help you get that cross-enterprise efficiency that you are looking for in what automation can do for you. Because again, the data doesn't just work in one place. It works across your entire SAP landscape. That SAP master data is critical everywhere. Being able to manage those processes and managing that conditional and other data and data objects that use it really can drive great benefits to your entire organization. And what are some of the things we think are going to happen in the future as we see automation evolving and as we see changes happening throughout the SAP landscape? One of the big ones is the integration into these larger complex processes. And we're starting to see that with the APIs, but as time evolves, the integration of those systems and the data within those systems and the processes across your organization are going to become more seamless. We're starting to see that now, but we believe in the next 5-10 years, you're really going to see that evolve. Incorporation of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Again, it's one of those things that it's just starting to come into the environments that we play in, and it's starting to become a factor in automation. We're doing a number of proofs of concept, and we're working with a couple of customers and working with a couple of other vendors for how do we incorporate machine learning primarily into these complex data intensive SAP processes to give you even more benefit, to give you even more value from automation than you're getting today. And then the final one that we're seeing is Fiori automation. We've got customers who've been using Fiori now for a number of years, and they realize that as many benefits as Fiori has over the SAP GUI, there still are some aspects of it where they're looking for automation. And we currently have a Fiori automation product in beta. If you are a current customer, of either Wind Shuttle or Precisely Automate and are interested in becoming part of that beta, definitely let us know. Get in touch with your account rep. But do expect in 2023, hopefully that product will be available for you to be able to automate those Fiori processes where Fiori itself doesn't quite do what you want it to do. And you need the greater capabilities and efficiencies that automation can deliver. All right. So finally, throughout this presentation, I've referenced the case study that I'm going to talk about. And in this case, it is a customer of ours who is an energy drinks manufacturer. And they had a pretty typical business. They're a regional manufacturer, and they were completely Excel spreadsheet based. So every one of their products had a product manager, and that product manager essentially owned an Excel workbook. And there were, multiple worksheets within that workbook. And often there were other individuals who were responsible for a worksheet or a column within a worksheet or down to a cell within a column within a worksheet. So a lot of complexity, massive amounts of manual work, but it worked for them. It was efficient enough that they grew to be a major player in the energy drinks business in their region. Organized chaos was kind of one of their descriptions of a little bit of spreadsheet hell, but it worked. And for them, it had been in place long enough that there were kind of standardized things that happened. They were still ungoverned. They still had data quality issues that were significant. It could take them half a day to track down something if they needed information about what was happening in a particular place within the spreadsheet. But again, it was able to work until they did a global distribution deal with one of the largest soft drinks manufacturers in the world. And what they found was this spreadsheet-driven process simply failed. It was not flexible enough. It was unable to scale. It could not move with the agility that they needed it to move with in a global marketplace. It couldn't adapt and adjust to all of the changes that suddenly they were confronted with. And their distribution partner kind of had a lot of time frames built into it. And they're like, this needs to happen now. And like I said, their Excel systems simply wouldn't work for them. They were already using our studio product in one part of their business. I think it was finance. But they knew about Evolve and they knew about our process automation capabilities. And so they came to us and said, can you help us with this? And we sat down with them, and over the course of a month, we did a number of just process workshops. So we started looking, under the core of it all is, what is the data that you're actually managing? What is that SAP data and all of the other, conditional and operational data that you are moving through this complex process? So what is that process? What is the data that is within it? What is the technology we have available? What is the technology you're using? And then the people involved. Remember, this is a process they'd been using for a long time. So they had a lot of institutional knowledge around these spreadsheet-based processes. So understanding that combination of data and process and technology and people was absolutely critical to being able to succeed in to get a system in place that could do what they needed it to do. A couple of things we recognized coming out of these workshops. One was there are lots of different types of new products. There are multiple product launch types as they describe them. One is one we're all familiar with, which is new products, completely new products. So it's either completely new or you're doing a line extension. Line extension would be something like if you're Coca-Cola, it's Cherry Coke. The big areas, though, they had the biggest challenges with were around product changes and around geographical expansion. So within product changes, you're dealing with things like ingredient and label changes. They're an energy drinks company. Within some countries, certain ingredients within energy drinks are highly regulated, or they can't be there at all. And now with label changes, you've got certain label requirements, and you've got language requirements. You've got a lot of complexity just in that one area. But then you have those legal and regulatory changes as well. Seasonal and promotional products. This is an energy drinks company. These people live for promotions. So knowing you suddenly have a lot of complexity around different events in different cities and different countries, again, the complexity just was exponentially multiplied because of this simple move of, oh, we're going to be global now. Yay, crap. Now we've got trouble. And there were lots of other challenges they had. And then the geographical expansion itself, where you've got new plants and you've got a completely new supply chain going to many of those plants in many of those countries. And you've got a new sales organization, and you've got a whole new set of customers and a new set of customer requirements that you have to be able to manage too. So this is where some of that complexity came in. And again, this is a supply chain challenge because if you think about it, their entire supply chain globally outside of their original region was completely new. And they needed to be able to create an automated process that they could manage to with that level of complexity. And coming out of those workshops, they identified three initial areas they wanted to focus on. One was point of sale materials, so merchandise. Merchandise is a huge part of their business. It's a significant part of their revenue stream. So being able to automate those processes around all of the promotions and everything they were going to be doing, absolutely critical for them. Raw materials, I mentioned, completely new supply chain. So imagine what it's like in your organization if you have to create a completely new supply chain in a new region. They wanted to be able to automate that, or they needed to be able to automate that. And then the new product, actual manufacturing process. They had this one down fairly pat, but being able to automate this as well was going to drive a lot of efficiencies through their organization and help them significantly. And with those three areas, what were we able to do for them? Well, first thing we were able to do was eliminate completely that Excel spreadsheet. This was now a centralized system within Evolve that starts with a landing page. And from that landing page, they can choose, what are we doing today? Are we going to do a new point of sale material, or are we going to extend an existing one? Same with raw materials. And then are we going to actually manufacture a product? Where are we going to manufacture it? What is all the detail that's going to be needed? Do we have everything we need? All that kind of stuff that I mentioned earlier. And from that single landing page, it gave them a huge benefit because what they were able to do now was they're not relying on a product manager and a spreadsheet and hoping that things are where they should be and all the data is correct. All of this data is now within the system, and it's able to work back and forth and exchange that data with SAP, like we mentioned earlier. It knows what's in SAP, or you can create new data outside of SAP, get it reviewed and approved, and then post it into SAP. There are many, many things you can do. Plus, again, if you're creating a new product, line extensions are much easier because they're not starting from scratch, which they were before in that Excel-based sheet. Now you've got lots of things that are pre-filled or have drop-down menus and you can choose from. A lot of benefit to having a centralized system. So within a few months, what kind of response or results did they see? They were able to cut their cycle times or reduce their cycle times by between 50 and 75%. Effectively, they cut their time to market in half. Now, what would that mean for your company to have that kind of efficiency gain, primarily through automating and managing your supply chain processes more effectively and more efficiently? Because that's really what they were driving through, was all of that front end stuff in those new markets. They had visibility throughout the process that they never had before. It was completely governed and it was repeatable. So these are the benefits they saw in this complex change that happened to them for really what was a supply chain challenge. So keep that in mind about what automation can do for you. And this is what before they even looked at what can we do with portals or connecting to other systems using APIs. This is purely an SAP challenge that they were faced with and that we were able to solve for them. So quickly, let's do a little bit of a wrap up. Now that you have a better idea of how we can help you drive greater efficiency through your supply chain challenges with Precisely, I want to leave you with one thought before we get to the final wrap up. And this is a quote from Justin Trudeau, and it is, "The pace of change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again." And this is kind of the epitome of the need for agility and resilience because we all feel it right now. And especially on the supply chain side, with all of the disruptions that have happened over the past few years, it feels like things have never gone this fast. But the reality of it is, we're never going to go back to a slow, normal, predictable supply chain ever again. I don't believe they will. I've talked to other supply chain professionals, and they don't believe it's going to happen either. So this pace of change has never been this fast, but it will never be this slow again. It's a frightening thought, but I firmly believe that automation is your best opportunity to get a handle on this pace of change and manage your business to it in a way that is predictable, resilient. You can get the agility you need, and your supply chain processes are visible throughout. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking again about automation and process automation for supply chain and how we can help you get control over what's happening within your supply chains. Real quick, what did we talk about? We talked about, the importance of agility and resilience. They really are the keys to your success in supply chain now and going forward. We believe very firmly, obviously, that supply chain automation success depends on adopting flexible technology platforms. Obviously, we believe ours is the best one for your challenges, but look at your options that are out there. Look at your business, figure out how can automation help you, and why is the need for flexibility in those automation platforms so great? Understanding that complex SAP centric supply chain processes are really challenging to automate. All of the things that happens with master data and all of the interdependencies that data has, especially for vendor and materials, and that finance data throughout on that upstream end of things for you. It's challenging, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we believe it is through these flexible automation platforms. Portals can help drive additional capabilities for you and greater efficiencies for you. APIs can help you create that end-to-end automation that you really want, where SAP is just part of that process. And finally, we believe very firmly that the future supply chain is going to be automated, it's going to be agile, and it's going to be resilient. We think there are a lot of opportunities for gains within supply chain. Go back to that early figure that I mentioned that McKinsey found, where 85% of supply chain owners and managers believe that they have insufficient technology. Well, what we've just talked about today is some of the technology that can help you get to that next level that you need. Hopefully, you now have a better idea of how Precisely and our Evolve platform can help you get greater benefits and some of the benefits of process automation in your SAP supply chain processes that you need to take your business really to that next level. If you want more information, you can find it at precisely.com. Just go to the solutions section and look for either process automation or SAP under the platforms, and you can find lots more information there. We've got examples of demos and white papers and case studies that will show you how others have used our systems to gain advantage within their supply chain. If you have a specific question, however, get directly in contact with us. You can either contact us via phone, you can set up a 30-minute call, or you can fill in your information through the Get in Touch button on precisely.com. And we will be happy to sit down with you and really understand what is the challenge you've got and how Precisely Automate and Precisely the Automate Evolve platform can help solve the challenge that you have today.
All right, and let's take a couple of questions really quickly. I'm going to turn it back over to Brian for those, and I'm going to switch cameras.
Thank you, Andrew. Love the presentation. Lots of great information and plenty to think about for the audience today. As a reminder to our audience, if you're interested in obtaining a PDF version of today's presentation, it'll be available for download on demand following the conclusion of this event. If you have any questions or comments, there's still time to submit them now, so get those in. Andrew, let's get to some of the questions. The first one is this. Based on your research and experience, where are some areas of supply chain that automation can have the greatest impact?
So I think, and I touched on this in the presentation, and thanks for the question, whoever asked it. One of the greatest things I think that happens if you look at some of the disruptions that have happened in supply chain is really the ability to be agile and in terms of not just automating the process, but being able to do things like onboard a vendor much more quickly or a supplier much more quickly. We've got a customer who actually, they cut their onboarding time from 144 hours to 6. So if you think about what that can do for you in terms of agility, just the ability to manage and onboard your suppliers and your vendors can be extremely helpful with that. And so it gives you the agility you need given all the disruptions that we're facing today. So I think that's probably the one area I would look at as a start. And then just some of the other things I touched on in terms of that coordination between your data from your vendor data and your materials data, especially in SAP. You've got a lot of overlap in those, just a massive amount of complexity.
Thanks, Andrew. Time savings. I think everybody could agree with that's something that they all want, right? So our next question kind of addresses an issue that everybody's lived through the last few years, and that's the complexity of supply chains. You talked about how complexity can affect upstream supply chain and how automation can improve efficiencies. But what about downstream? What are some areas that automation can help with downstream challenges?
So again, I think part of it comes back to agility and just the ability to much more quickly and efficiently manage your data. So it falls in really, I would say, let me give it three categories. One is just pure data quality. So you're not having to go back. Automation gives you that higher data quality initially, and then you're not having to go back and fix your data or find out after you've shipped something that you shipped it to the wrong person. So data quality overall is a very important one. The speed that we talked about earlier that I mentioned answering the last question, being able to onboard a customer quickly, or having things like customer portals where the customer can actually make updates to their own data that goes back into SAP, whether it's gone through a review and approval process or whether it's just automatically gone straight in, that can be very critical. And then the other one is, if you think about like one of the examples we talked about in the presentation, where you have a completely new supply chain and you've got a completely new sales organization, and being able to coordinate the data, especially between your sales system. So let's say it's Salesforce and SAP, and making sure that you've got the right data between those two and connecting them up. Those things are very important. So those are areas where I think on the downstream side of it, we can add a lot of value, and automation overall can just help you improve your processes. So if you think about end to end, really those upstream through creating the product and then downstream actually getting it in market, automation can help you all the way across that value chain, really drive a lot of efficiencies.
I think you touched on this, and there's a lot of conversations I've had with people about the data and the right data and too much data, not the right data. If automation can help process that and get you the right amount of data and the right kind of data, I think that's really important to do, obviously. So, so let's move on. Next question. This is one I love because I like to have control over my life. And the question is about the things that we don't have much control over. So the question is, a lot of the issues created in the supply chain are due to supplier constraints and a lack of predictability. So Andrew, how can automation and or technology tools help mitigate some of these challenges, the things that we don't have that as much control over?
Well, good question. Again, I think it goes back to the agility, because if you look at some companies during the disruption that we had over the last few years, some companies have been able to adjust to it very quickly, whether they change suppliers, whether they change suppliers and internal processes, and automation, being able to rapidly pivot and change and make adjustments, whether it's in your data, whether it's in your processes, whether it's in your people, or think about what it means for supply chain to be able to change your data very quickly from one process to another and gain an advantage, or just be able to manage to it. I talk about kind of that speed of the marketplace and how fast it moves, and being able to pivot and change as quickly as you can be absolutely critical to your business. So we see all this disruption happening, being agile and having that agility. And one of the things that automation honestly has traditionally suffered from is it can be very inflexible. You decide to automate a process, and that's the way it's going to be. No matter what happens, it's going to do that same thing over and over again. And now we're seeing with platforms, our platform, and there's a few others out there, but we believe ours is the best. That's our job, is to say that. But they're becoming much more flexible. So you're able to make changes either on the fly, or in many cases, this whole movement towards citizen developers. So the people actually developing your automation and managing it and creating it are much closer to the processes and the data. So you have people, especially within your SAP organizations, whether they're a functional SAP or whether they're even somebody in the business. You may have somebody in procurement or somebody in finance or somebody on your master data team who can create and make changes to those automations very quickly and make updates. So we're seeing a lot of changes, especially as technology evolves, that allow you and enable you to adapt very to anything that changes like that. And frankly, when you have that confidence that you can make those changes quickly, it makes your life a whole lot easier, knowing that your marketplace is subject to a lot of disruption.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
Unfortunately,
unfortunately, time goes by much quicker than we anticipate all the time. We have several more questions to get to, and I apologize for not getting to all of them today. If we didn't answer your question today, it'll be forwarded to Andrew and the Precisely team for follow-up. I'd like to thank Andrew Hayden for spending time with us today, and I want to thank Precisely for sponsoring today's webcast. And a thank you to everybody who listened today and took the time to listen and watch. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.